Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. This week we are looking at part of the Sermon on the Mount called the Antitheses. In these passages, Jesus introduces them by saying, "You have heard that it was said," and then reframes it all in saying, "But I say to you." In his words, Jesus takes God's commandments and invites us into living in love for our neighbor. Today we want to look at two of the antitheses, the first one on adultery, and then the second one where Jesus spoke about divorce. So let's dig in. Some of us who are a bit older remember President Jimmy Carter. While there are wide opinions of his presidency, most agree that he was a good person. His life since leaving the presidency confirms that as well. However, while he was president, he gave an interview to Playboy magazine in which he admitted that he had lusted after other women in his heart. He took a lot of heat for that statement, but the fact is that Carter understood the words of Jesus, while those criticizing him did not. In Matthew 5:27 through 30, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell." To understand what Jesus is talking about here, we need to look at God's view of sex. And I wish it was a view much more widely shared in our world. It's not what you think. First, God created sexuality before God created marriage. People were made male and female in Genesis 1, and then marriage shows up in Genesis 2. So the Bible understands sex as a created gift of God. Secondly, the Bible is realistic that sex is difficult to govern. But since sex is an expression of the whole self, it is a gift from God filled with all sorts of human ambiguities, frailties, and failings. Thus, we can bless one another with rightly used sexuality, or we can use sex to reject, dominate, use, and abuse others. Thirdly, sex as a gift means it is far more than just procreation. It is also a means of covenant love between two people. In order for that gift to be most meaningful, and as God intended, sex should be found within that covenant of love. So the covenant of marriage mirrors the covenant we have with God. And then lastly, adultery is a violation of that covenant. It uses others and is not an appropriate love of our neighbor. One's spouse is violated, and the covenant with God is violated as well. So here, Jesus isn't attacking sexual desire, but rather that which seeks to see one's neighbor only as a sexual object. That's not how we are supposed to value each other. In essence, such sexual desire is focused on the self. Jesus calls us to focus on the good and love of our neighbor. The other antithesis we want to consider today is the one about divorce. Jesus said, "It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." The controversy centers on two Old Testament passages. Genesis tells us that what God has joined together, let no one rip apart. But in Deuteronomy it says, whoever discards his wife, let him give her a bill of divorce. The issue is, how do you reconcile those two? The issue was hotly debated by the rabbis. Some said divorce was allowed only for some shameful act like adultery. Others said you could divorce for anything displeasing. When Jesus speaks about divorce, he's really doing much more than talking about the dissolution of a marriage. In a society and time when women had little value, Jesus is lifting up the value of women. We need to note, in that day, a man could divorce his wife, but the wife had no option to divorce her husband. Women had no rights. But Jesus is telling us that women are loved children of God just like men, and have value as persons just like men. They are not to be tossed aside lightly. The marriage covenant is serious business. And if one is willing to put it aside lightly, what does that say about how one considers our covenant with God? Would we be willing to put it aside as well? Divorce is regrettable, but sometimes needed. Regardless, Jesus sees both parties as valuable and loved children of God. Jesus has a high view of marriage and a high view of women as equal to men. Our call is to do the same. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.